Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast, supported by Lecole, here with Benji Naesen today on Saturday evening with Tour de Romandie Stage 4, the big mountain test, 159 kilometres from Sion to Tion 2000, a ski resort at 2,100 metres altitude is where this is supposed to finish. The finish got brought forward, or the stage got brought forward by 2 hours in advance of the original starting time because of bad weather. We still had the bad weather today and poor visibility. It's 14.6 Ks at 7% is the first category one. Then they do another Cat 1, the Suin climb, 14 Ks at 6.7%. Then a descent into the last beast of a climb. Over an hour it would take them, 20.7 Ks at 7.6% with some steep sections in it. The GC standings going into this stage in Romandie, if you've not been following too closely, Marc Soler for Movistar, 14 seconds ahead of Thomas and Port, both on the same time. Other GC contenders of note, Kelderman, 21 back, Koos, 21 back, Izagirre, 26 back, and Woods was about 30 seconds back at the same time as Izagirre, Gorka, and Fausto Masnada. But Benji, a forlorn break went in the wet conditions. You'd think they wouldn't have a chance, but some pretty good guys in there.
Yeah, and became very interesting towards the end. But first of all, the riders in the breakaway included Joseph Czerny. We saw him do that duo attack and eventually lead Honoré to a victory in one of the earlier races this season. Mats Schmidt for Israel Startup Nation. We had Cor Vos once again, 2 days in a row, trying to test out the pronunciation of LR once again. Then Matt Holmes was in there as well, so a teammate for Ladu Sedal and Magnus Cort Nielsen, Petilli, and Peo. Now, from this group, what's important to this is that Goossens is on roughly, I think, a minute and a bit in GC before the stage, and Magnus Cort Nielsen on 59 seconds. So let's say that the break gets a huge gap, then it could come into play towards the end of the stage. But they didn't have that huge of a gap, 4 minutes-ish, until, for the first part of the stage. And we saw them go into the second last climb of the day, and that gap started being reduced by the likes of Movistar, who was using the likes of Villela, in the group. And towards the top, the gap was down to a good 3 minutes 45. And, well, something interesting happened because on the uphill of that climb, we saw that the fog was getting immensely heavy and very difficult to see. The visibility was very low. And I bet it looked like we had points where we could see like 10 meters ahead and not further than that. The camera almost couldn't see riders at a certain point. So pretty crazy weather. But what was happening was that we heard that the radio of the race radio, ended up calling out that they're going to neutralize 3 kilometers in the descent, a certain 3 kilometers. We, the viewer, did not really know which part that was yet at that point. And I was genuinely curious, how are they going to do this? How are they going to make sure that the gap between the peloton and the breakaway is going to stay the same? Well, turns out they weren't. So their plan was as simple as putting a car ahead of the breakaway, and putting a car ahead of the peloton and making sure that the peloton and the breakaway need to ride behind their own cars with a guy waving a stop sign in front of the group. And while that's actually a pretty good way of making sure that the gap in between could stay the same, the only thing that might make it troublesome is if one car rides faster than the other. And that was the case here because by the end of that 3 kilometer section, the gap had expanded by, I think, 1 minute and 5 seconds, which is quite substantial. And afterwards, they basically just rode on again, and the neutralization stopped. In general, it's good that they made the decision because on the uphill, it was looking very dangerous for the descent itself. But I think that the execution was a bit flawed, and it isn't the first time that this happens. But I want to throw it over to you, and I want to hear what you think about this neutralization and how they handled it.
Well, this has been a problem for a while. I think 2013 Giro, Rigoberto Urán still believes he would have won that Giro d'Italia on the Stelvio stage where I think a descent was neutralised. That's why he was so, or in such disbelief on the Col d'Isère stage 19 of the Tour de France 2019, when I think you might remember on that descent, people were telling him it'd been cancelled, neutralised. He was like, no, it's not. because he was remembering that Stelvio stage where I think Quintana attacked through the neutralisation. Dwyer of Landron, they neutralised because the ambulance needed, this is this year, needed to get to the women's race. And I think Purcellberger, who was in the break, they then stopped the break, and the break was called by the peloton. Then they let the break go ahead, and they didn't include Purcellberger in it, and he had to hold on to the Sporza Moto to catch back up. So I think neutralizations, there needs to be a pre-agreed speed, I guess. If they're both on a downhill, you need to say to the cars, okay, we're both going to go 30 k's an hour and stay at that for a predefined period of time. And you need to take the time check at the time of neutralization and ensure that that time gap is the same when you end the neutralization, whether you're on a descent or whatever. Because, it could have been unfair what happened today. And we'll see whether it made a difference. Movistar were pacing into that last climb, the gap 5:45 going into this beast of a climb, maybe even 6 minutes. And Court and Patelli were looking really strong. Movistar, I think, was it Erviti they might have had on the front? They didn't have a pure climber. They pretty much just had Lopez and Soler behind him. I think they had Cataldo as well pulling. They had another rider. Ineos had Dennis, I'm not sure if Benji mentioned, yo-yoing at the back on the descent, took it very tentatively, then took a long time, 4 or 5 Ks at least, to move up to the front on that climb, and didn't really start pacing. And I guess, were you surprised, Benji, that Movistar were pacing on the early slopes? They didn't really seem to be making an impression. Were they going for Lopez stage win? What was their rationale? Just defend the jersey?
Yeah, I think defending the jersey was coming into play because, as I said at the start, Magnus Cort Nielsen had a minute deficit in GC before the stage started, and then with a 6-minute gap towards him and Patelli being the two leftovers of the breakaway, well, it's starting to get difficult because you got to get back 5 minutes on a 20K climb. On paper, if you have Dennis pacing the entire way, that would be something that I'd say it's definitely possible to catch that up quite easily. But it became quite tense because, Ineos wasn't coming to the fort and wasn't going to immediately take over. They were letting Villela and Cataldo do all the work for Movistar first, and they were trying to have Movistar, pretty much have their plate eaten up first before they start eating their own plate at Ineos. And I think, I don't know, I think that there's an argument for should Movistar have put Ineos in a worse position, considering with the time gap Soler had in GC before the stage, it would on paper still be Ineos that is looking for the GC here with the time trial tomorrow. Perhaps they could have put Ineos in a worse situation if they forced them to do something. But then again, Movistar is going to pull the same card. They're going to say, oh, no, you're the leader. Just you do it. So I don't know. There's two sides to this, and I don't really know if we can judge on that aspect.
Yeah, and they weren't really thinning out the group too much. They were keeping the gap fairly stable, to be honest, at about 5:30 instead, until Ineos started pulling on the front with about 13 kilometers to go. And that was with Dunbar and Dennis. Immediately, Hirschi and Van Wilder were dropped. Patelli and Court had dropped their breakaway companions quite early on the climb. Hobig Olsens and Matthew Holmes were gone. So they were working pretty well together on the front. But you've got to remember how cold this stage is, how wet it is, long, so much climbing in this stage. They're going up to pretty high altitude, 2,100 meters. And Magnus Cort is a good climber for a guy with a quick finish, but he's not a pure climber by any stretch of the imagination. And trusting the time gaps based on what they were telling us, I think from 13 Ks to about 10 Ks, the gap went from 5:20 to 4:30, then another 30 seconds from 10 to 9 Ks. So they'll bring it down really quickly, particularly when Dennis got on the front. Dunbar took a rest. He was mowing into this gap. And then Benji, 6.5 Ks to go. Court has gone clear at this point on his own, dropped Patelli. 3:10 the gap, which is, it's still a decent gap, but if you crack, that can be eaten into quickly. Marc Soler attacked in the leader's jersey with Dennis right there pacing with Port Thomas on Dennis Wheel. I mean, what was that? I don't know no words. Like, it makes no sense. And I guess that's why he is the J.R. Smith. Sometimes, shooter's going to shoot. And today's shot definitely didn't go in. But Marc Soler, Benji, hold that thought. Talking about Marc Soler on an HC climb. But anyway, he got reeled back in. Rowan Dennis immediately was like, don't chase him. He said to Thomas and Port, don't chase him. I'll bring him back. But it was Lucas Hamilton attacking at 5Ks to go. The gap's still 3:10, 3:15. Did you think that was a better move from Hamilton? Do you think maybe Dennis had started to lose some steam and he needed to go then?
Well, I think when it comes to Dennis, it's hard to say when he's losing steam, but I think when it comes to Hamilton, he's in a situation where he needs to attack, he needs to gain time, and he needs to do it on this climb because tomorrow in the time trial, he's going to lose time. And it's also likely the strategy that he's being fought in the team as well, because we saw quite a few times in the history of Bike Exchange and Orica and Mitchelton and all those kind of deviations of the certain team that Yates is always attacking, or either of the Yates are always attacking early, and Chavez did it in Catalunya, if I recall correctly, also doing it the same way because he's trying to hope that, Ineos doesn't care too much about him, but I'm afraid that he's a bit too close in GC to make that move this time around. And that's why I think that his move was also kind of dangerous, but eventually the moment that Hamilton had a bit of a gap, we saw that in the peloton, the elite group, the people that were left, that Dennis was running out of steam because he moved to the bag and he was done for. And the Richie Porte that was also in that group that had looked to be at the back for quite a bit in that group suddenly came to the front and started pacing for Geraint Thomas. So there was a clear hierarchy in that team. Thomas is clear leader here, as we, I think, somewhat expected. At least I kind of did. And,
then the time gaps went crazy.
Yeah.
It was 3:20. It went to 2:50. And then as Dennis was pulling, it went out to 3:35 again in a kilometer. And I was like, Magnus Cort did not just put 30 seconds into Rowan Dennis in the last kilometer. Then we've got the same race situation Benji said, and it's 4.2 Ks to go. The time gaps just leave. We don't see them for ages. It hovers on 4.2 kilometers to go, I swear, for like 7 minutes.
Yes.
Which I was, at this point, all faith in the time gaps and distance remaining out the window. We are expecting Cort and Patelli either to be crossing the line and winning the stage in 5 seconds or being caught by the GC group despite supposedly having a 3-minute gap.
And the funniest part is here that we saw no time gap for a while, and then suddenly we have attacks from the group behind, the elite group, including the likes of Woods making a move towards Hamilton. We had O'Connor moving up, and we saw that basically, Board was also not really looking too bright in that group anymore, so the pace there was going down. And suddenly, 20 seconds shows up on the left top, and I'm like, how are they 20 seconds behind Magnus Cort Nielsen? But
it was 150.
Apparently it's Patelli that came out of nowhere and came back to Cort, who was basically standing still at that point, and then passed Cort and dropped Cort where he was standing. And Cort was basically done for the Danish hope for GC and Romandie, completely gone. And then we go back to the elite group. What happens there?
Well, Cort and Patelli up the road. And when you saw the fact that Patelli caught Cort, it's like, that's not because Patelli's got second win. It's because Cort is absolutely done.
Yeah.
So it was going to be Hamilton and Woods. Woods bridged to him. He was looking really good, Mike Woods, powering away. Ben O'Connor was trying to bridge to him. And then when it cut back to the, GC group or what was left of it, we didn't see Geraint Thomas. And my guess was he's up the road somewhere doing I thought it was the last kilometer bridge, but it was like 3.5 Ks left. Visibility terrible. Port dropped. Koos dropped. I think Soler starting to drop at this point. And then we suddenly got a shot of Masnada pacing Geraint Thomas harder than he's probably ever pulled for Almeida. Bridges him back to Woods and Hamilton. Maybe looking for that Ineos Domestique sweet contract in 2022 if he doesn't get re-signed by Lefebvre. And he bridges Thomas to Woods and Hamilton, and we knew this was trouble. Thomas immediately attacks. He says, thanks, Fausto. I'll send you the documents by DocuSign next week, and skips past Woods and Hamilton and leaves Masnada after having bridged him across. Woods gets onto, I think Woods was already further up the road. Sorry, that was a Hamilton group. Thomas then catches Woods afterwards. We're guessing it's 2.5 Ks to go. The GC contenders are scattered all down the mountain. We have no idea of time gaps. We just assume they're big. And then Thomas just starts pacing straight away for Woods, Benji. And I guess why does that make sense, given the time trial is the last stage tomorrow?
Well, even if Woods ends up winning the stage from the group that Thomas is in, then we will have a situation where Thomas is still the all-out favorite for GC. Even if Woods wins in this group, he would not pass Thomas. That's what we had in mind at that moment. So Thomas was like, if I keep on pacing like this and you overthrow me at the end, then you get 10 bonus seconds, I get 6. I lose 4 towards you, but I'm going to destroy you in the time trial anyway. So it's basically secured if we ride to the line like this. And that's what we had in mind. O'Connor moving up a tiny bit behind, came close, but eventually disappeared for a bit again. So wasn't looking like he was going to play into the stage. And we went into the last kilometer, and I was thinking, does Thomas have the punch to do this? We know that he can do pretty good final kilometers, but we're talking about Woods here. And Woods, we know, is a puncher, and he's had pretty good climbing experience already in the UAE Tour earlier this season. So who am I going for? I think that Woods is going to take it in the sprint. That's my initial thought going into final kilometer and going into 400 meter to go when Thomas was still pacing in the front. What did you think was going to happen, and what actually happened?
Well, I actually thought it was really, really close between these two. Woods beat Thomas in the stage 4 uphill sprint, the stage Chavez won in Catalonia. And then on the stage beforehand, Thomas outkicked Woods right at the end, but he more dropped him proper. And as Benji said, I think UAE, stage 5, the Jebel Jais climb it might have been. Maybe I'm misremembering, but Woods was strong there. So I thought Woods slight edge, but you never know at the end of an hour in the cold and wet. Woods moved up early, looked like he was overcoming Thomas, and then Thomas came back in the last 150, 125 meters, slid underneath him, taking the inside line, went in front of Woods. Woods then went back onto his wheel a little bit. They both get onto, Woods gets onto the hoods, starts sprinting to the left-hand side of Thomas. Thomas, you see him try to shift up and then he's about to get out of the saddle, and his right hand loses control of his right hood as he goes to put pressure down on the pedals to start sprinting, misses his right hood, and then crosses himself with his left hand, then coming across and crashes pretty heavily in the last 50 meters. Woods then, not Stephen Bradbury, because he was probably going to win the sprint anyway, although I think it would have been close, wins the stage, and Thomas is just on the ground trying to get up. Looks pretty banged up. He's kind of shaken. He's trying to get onto his bike. Remember, this is uphill. He's in cleats, and they've just done one of the nastiest, maybe the most disgusting stage this year that we've had in World Tour, and maybe Tirreno, but this is up there, especially for the climb they've had. And he's crashed pretty heavily, and he's struggling to get back on the bike, and he ends up, despite sprinting side by side with Woods, being overcome by O'Connor, and he comes third on the stage. Woods first, O'Connor second, 17 seconds back. Geraint Thomas losing 21 seconds in the last 50 meters. Hamilton fourth, Masnada fifth, Port sixth, Ion Izagirre seventh, Caruso eighth, Soler ninth, Arensman 10th, with Kelderman on the same time as him, the two Dutchmen riding together. But do you think Thomas, Benji, do you agree that that's why he crashed, or did he misshift and his chain stopped or something?
It looked like exactly how you said it. I'm not a mechanical expert of bikes, but I feel like that is the way that the crash happened, unfortunately. And it's really annoying as well, because when you're riding uphill and you crash in an uphill situation, you sometimes have worse crashes than you have in descents, because in descents you end up getting mostly road rash if you crash into a corner and just slip forward. And in an uphill section, we have had, for example, Nibali in that Tour de France stage. I think, was it Alpe d'Huez? I don't remember fully, where he crashed and he had a back injury. And sometimes the slowest crashes can do the most damage, unfortunately. But let's hope Thomas is okay here. His crash did lose him the lead in this race that he had virtually going into the last 200 meters. And quite simply, he's going to start tomorrow. If he starts, let's hope he does. He's going to start behind Woods in GC. 11 seconds, if I checked correctly just a second ago. But that means that on paper, if the situation goes, then a time trial for Thomas, if he has no issues with the crash today, he should still win GC, I think.
I'm trying to look at Ineos social media, and I can't really see confirmation that he's okay. It says he remounts to take third over the line. I'll look at his social media. He doesn't say anything either. So I presume he'll be okay. Hopefully he is. I mean, God, crashes have affected his Palmares so much. And if he's fine, he'll win the GC at Tour de Romandie. And let me run through why that is with the profile tomorrow. It's an ITT to finish it off from Fribourg to Fribourg. 16 kilometers. There's some climbing in it, up and down a lot, actually. In the first 2Ks, they do an 800-meter 13% climb. Then after that, a 1,100-meter 5.6% climb. And the last 1,600 meters is a gradual climb as well. So perfect. Absolutely perfect for Geraint Thomas. And is Ganna still here?
I have no clue. I generally have no clue. Somewhere at the back with Chris Froome somewhere.
He finished the stage. Oh, did he? I don't know. There's people still coming over the line as we were recording, Benji. So I think Froome has finished. Ganna's finished. I don't know whether it's him or Thomas tomorrow. But the point is, GC, Thomas is putting normally 30 seconds into Woods plus, one would think. So as long as he's fine, he should wrap up GC. But yeah, Benji, do you think there's a few talking points here? Koos, not got a good track record in the cold and wet. He lost 3 minutes. Kruijswijk, 6 minutes back. I mean, people were saying, because when we mentioned Kruijswijk as potential GC for Tour de France, I was like, no, I don't see it. Do you think this stage is a complete anomaly where we can't really take proper learnings from it because it was so weird, so cold, so disrupted?
I think it's really hard to get something out of this. We know that Thomas is looking good on the climbs. I think it's harsh to say that he's not looking good here, definitely. I think that if he has no issues with the injuries from this crash, then I'm still pretty bullish on him overall for a potential podium at the Tour de France. But the problem is that we don't have any indication between him and the Slovenians. He's accidentally evading those two, and that means that since Tirreno, until the Tour, we won't have any indication to where the difference is between those those three riders. And then it's hard to say, he's at a good level to beat the Slovenians. I think if O'Connor is 15 seconds behind you, not taking away from the wonderful performance by O'Connor here, but it doesn't shout Tour de France victory for me. And that's where I'm like, I'm not sure that this is an indicator from a performance aspect. Then again, when it comes to the weather and so forth, pretty insane stage. It's an absolute heroic stage towards the end. And it's hard to say. I can't say where this aligns up to the Slovenians, and I can't say whether this proves anything for Thomas or disproves anything for Thomas. But either way, great stage by him, and unfortunately for him, it didn't turn out the way he likely hoped it would. And hopefully he can punch back tomorrow.
I think if I was Dave Brailsford watching this week at Romandie, watching my two GC contenders, Port and Thomas, riding in these conditions, and Dennis as well, maybe I would say their most important domestique, frankly, for the Tour, watching them riding around. I was going to say on the pod, Benji, I can't believe Thomas has made it through this Romandie without crashing. And he did right at the last. And I guess this is why I spoke to Kemner about it last year. People were querying why Roglic and Pogačar taking such a big gap off before the Tour de France. Well, Dauphiné, Roglic couldn't get on the TT bike after his crash in the Dauphiné before the Tour. And you're going to get paid millions and millions of euro. The biggest, honestly, Romandie, who gives a fuck? It's who's watching this race really compared to the Tour de France. I'm sure they get more sort of viewership, marketing KPIs, stuff for their sponsors at one stage at the Tour than the whole of Romandie, probably easily. So peaking for the Tour and keeping yourself in safe, good condition is more important. And that's why, I'd think twice about sending my GC contenders to Romandie next year in the wet. I know that's not what we want to hear as fans. Not everything's about the Tour. But honestly, you can get the same training gains in good weather on your own if you're a GC contender. You go and we're going to do 3 Cat 1 climbs at this intensity. Sure, you might want to do... It's not like the Slovenians, Benji, are not racing much anyway. But what would you do if you were a DS? Would you think the same way, or would you think tune-up races are essential? And it's a double-edged sword for Thomas and Port. The less they race, probably the bunch handling gets worse, and they're more likely to crash in the Tour. But the more they race before the Tour, the more they're likely to crash.
Yeah, it's a hard decision. I think that in regards to GC and Romandie, I wouldn't make any unnecessary risks. And I think that the problem here is that I would not expect an uphill section in the wet to be a risk. A descent in the wet would be a risk. So I think that this is just simply a small mistake by Thomas that ends up with him on the ground. I don't think we can say that it's due to the extreme weather conditions that he crashed, although obviously if his hand wasn't wet, he might not have slipped off his hoods. But I think, I don't know. I think that it's kind of a crazy stage in total, because you have to imagine that these riders throughout the entire stage ride through a wet condition and then go up to a height meters, altitudes of 2K, which means that they're in a snowy area and it's starting to freeze at that point. So that's the worst aspect for me here. I think it's impossible to know before Romandie that it's going to rain like this and that the conditions are so extreme. But if the conditions are very extreme in a race, you have to consider perhaps pulling out a rider. But if they're on the top 3 of GC, are you going to do that? I don't know. I think those riders also kind of want to raise their, perhaps Port not as much as Thomas in these conditions. Thomas has a history of crashing a lot, but he also has a history of sometimes doing very well in extreme conditions, like that Hand-Wevelgem where he crashed. Okay, that ruins my argument. But you know what I mean. I think it's a hard decision, and I definitely would not know what to do. 100%.
Yeah, I think it makes sense in the context of last year, given everyone was flying after lockdown, that you don't need, if you're a GC contender, you don't need loads of race days to turn up at the Tour in top condition. And the Slovenians have raced more than enough in the Ardennes, etc., and Pyrenees-Tirreno. Sepp Kuss, Benji, do you think 100% no GC prospects at the Tour? Just given how this entire week has gone for him, he should be firmly on domestique duties.
Yep, and I think he himself is probably more okay with that as well. He said it throughout last year as well, that he's tuning more towards the domestique role for now. And I also think that the Tour de France is just not the one to send him to as a GC rider. I think that of all the riders in Jumbo, he's one of the ones that I'm quite clear of that he's not going to be riding for GC. And they've got other options to try and play with in regards to having them in the top 10 and playing a role to kind of twist around the race for the other competitors they have. So I think that he's on domestique duties and should be that for the Tour de France. I think that if Vuelta fits him better, but he's going to need to be more consistent. And if it rains, he's going to need to be there as well then.
Yeah, definitely some learnings from Romandie, but I'm not sure it should really influence too much, except for one man, Benji. There's one man where I think there's real learnings from this, and it's Mike Woods. Is climbing differently in the high mountains and big mountain climbs than we've ever seen before, because it's not just Romandie. Catalunya too. He was really good on those 2 stages, stage 3 and 4. And he's looks even better than he did at EF, Benji. I mean, Liège, he was super strong, creating that race-defining split a week ago. Now he's winning a mountain stage, and I think he still would have won it without Thomas crashing. Winning a mountain stage like this in Tour de Romandie, do you think top 5 at the Tour is possible for Mike Woods?
No, because I don't think his time trial is good enough. I think that he's quite simply going to lose a lot of time towards the competitors that we know that can time trial for GC. And that's why I don't believe in that. I think Michael Woods is ideal for doing the same that Dan Martin did at the Vuelta last year. He is able to get close in GC with these very steep finals, and he's also able to do larger mountains now. And that's the two things you need for the Vuelta. You don't exactly need the best time trial to win the Vuelta, but it obviously certainly helps. Look at Roglic. But yeah, I think Vuelta fits him better. I think Tour doesn't fit him for GC. I think that he should focus on, I don't know. It's hard because they've got multiple riders in their team, and let's say that they do give a spot to Chris Froome, then they're taking away a spot of a domestique that could help Woods or Dan Martin here, and that's not really an ideal thing. And
they should take Woods,
It's
Martin, Nealons, Impey, Berwick, Mansford, Schmidt, and
Greipel, the GC man.
Yeah, I'm not looking at their roster.
Me neither.
But yeah, I don't know whether they're taking Froome, but I think they should. They owe it to the condition right now of Mike Woods to give him the strongest team possible. Maybe Ben Herman's there as well. And Jesus, their team is not deep, Benji.
Yeah.
They got wow. It's weird.
With the likes of Dan Martin, who has to do both the Giro and the Tour de France on his schedule, so
didn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I think
you got two guys who could have won on Britannia. He's won on Britannia before.
Yeah, you're right. He won't this year, but I think that we've got much more competition for that race. But that's for the Tour preview, very, very far in the future. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. All right. I think Mike Woods is in great condition. Congrats to him on taking a very, very big win on one of the nastiest stages we might see this year. Hope Geraint Thomas is okay. If he is, he should destroy the TT tomorrow and clean up the GC for Tour de Romandie. And let me just check who should come second, Benji. Just check quickly who'll come second. Should be Richie Port, one would think, should come... 36 seconds between him and Woods. Port normally should as well. And want to see how Ben O'Connor goes in the ITT tomorrow. I mean, he's a good example, Benji. So I know we were supposed to sign off, but Ben O'Connor is a good example. Anytime a team complains, we don't have any money. Ineos have so much money. How can we compete with Ineos? Ben O'Connor is on a 1-year deal, I presume, on the minimum at As You Deserve, Citroën. And it's not like, how is Ben O'Connor coming second in a Tour de Romandie mountain stage? Hello? He was in the break 3 days in a row for NTT at the Giro last year and won a stage. He was fucking strong at all of those stages. And I think only got, he was flying. It's not a surprise. And NTT were folding. Maybe everyone had already firmed up their books or whatever, but As You Deserve, Citroën gave him a 1-year deal. 1 year on a minimum. And if anyone has any brain, next year the bloke should be on a 3-year deal somewhere on a lot more money. He's only 25. I mean, he won a stage in the Tour of the Alps back in 2018. I think he had injury issues. He wasn't at the best team. I'm telling you, I know just because he's Australian, but he's from Western Australia. It's not near where I live, so I'm not biased. He's legit, okay? And the fact that he got a 1-year deal means that people are not valuing talent properly in World Tour, which isn't a surprise to anyone. All right, that's where we'll end today, and we'll see you tomorrow with the last stage of Tour de Romandie. Ciao.